Chapter 1. Hell's Kitchen. Chapter text. Harry took Dumbledore's arm, and in a flash of contorting limbs and frenetic sounds and colours, they had left Privet Drive and appeared on another street corner. This street looked nothing like the Dursleys' pristine, conservative neighbourhood. From the look of it, Harry would guess this was an exclusively wizarding neighbourhood, judging by the off-kilter angles of the houses, the flocks of owls, the local apothecaries and robe shops, and the roads that resembled and rippled just like murky green lake water. Harry followed the Hogwarts headmaster as he started off up the street, glancing at him with a questioning eye. Dumbledore smiled wryly. "Welcome to Wandsworth Green, Harry," he said serenely. This entire community sits on top of a small lake in the Muggle neighbourhood of Wandsworth Common and is hidden by very powerful concealment spells. Normally, one can only enter it by stepping onto a certain pattern of planks on the bridge that goes over part of the lake. But I thought that apparition would be more efficient, given the circumstances. Harry frowned. Circumstances, sir. Dumbledore led him past the apothecary and toward the end of the street. We are here to try to recruit our newest professor. I anticipate, however, that he might be a bit reluctant. Here we are. They had approached a restaurant. At first, Harry was alarmed at the sight of it, for it looked like it was on fire, but after a second he realized there was no danger. The ceiling was simply decorated with constantly raging, but perfectly contained magical flames, as well as a header in red neon lights. Hell's Kitchen. Gordon always did have an inherent flair for the dramatic, Dumbledore commented serenely upon noticing Harry's quirked eyebrow. The two pushed open the door to find an empty dining room. Harry could see on the door that dinner hours had ended not too long ago. Just inside was a young man, a little older than Harry, with a large nose bussing tables, with a magic rag that moved over the wood and back into the man's hand by itself. He looked up, immediately putting on a customer service mask that made it clear he'd said this exact thing 1,000,000 times. "Excuse me, but the restaurant is closed." He stopped abruptly, however, when he recognized the people who had entered the restaurant. "Here, Professor Dumbledore." "Good evening, Bo," Dumbledore greeted pleasantly. "You're looking well. I presume Gordon is just helping with kitchen cleanup." Yes, Professor," said Bo anxiously. He shot a glance at Harry. He looked incredibly uncomfortable, and he kept licking his lips. "Shall I go fetch him for you?" "If you would," Dumbledore said indulgently. The man called Bo gave a weak little nod. Then, glancing over his shoulder and back at Harry again, he bustled off toward the kitchen. Harry looked at Dumbledore confusedly. He knew the defense against the dark arts job was always very hard to fill, but from the sound of things, this teacher Dumbledore was seeking out was a cook in some restaurant. It wasn't like Harry underestimated him because of this, but all of the other professors, excluding particularly bizarre oddities like Umbridge, usually had a background teaching about or fighting against the dark arts. Even Lockhart had had a misleading reputation of being talented in fighting dark creatures. A raised voice came from the kitchen, but Harry couldn't quite make it out. A moment later, a tall man with a square face, blonde hair, and very sharp blue eyes came stomping through the door of the kitchen. He wore a white chef's uniform with the sleeves rolled up and still had a large kitchen knife in one of his strong fists. "Dumbledore," the chef said coldly. "So you did choose to show your monkey's arse of a face here." "As always, Gordon, your language is delightfully colorful," Dumbledore replied, clearly not offended at all. "Don't bullshit me," the man called Gordon swore angrily. "If you've come to try to recruit me, you've got another thing coming. I frankly don't know how you've kept the loyalty of half the people who work for you with your fucked-up attitude toward human life. Now pick up your feet and get out of my restaurant, you blasted numpty." He stopped abruptly, however, at the sight of Harry just behind Dumbledore. "Harry, may I introduce Gordon Ramsay?" Dumbledore said calmly. "Gordon, I believe you're already familiar with Harry Potter." Harry's face had been scrunched up in shock and righteous anger, but his temper cooled when Dumbledore spoke. Ramsay's expression likewise seemed to clear at the sight of Harry. There was something almost guilty in his face. "Yes," he said lowly. "How do you do?" He extended a hand to Harry, who took it out of obligation but refused to shake it. Ramsay's mouthing off to Dumbledore had left a sour taste in his mouth. "Hello," he said stiffly. Ramsay offered a faintly wry smile. I must apologize for my language, although I dare say you know it all by now. I try not to swear. My hand unfortunately just gets forced by certain individuals." He shot a cold look at Dumbledore. "How long is that list of individuals, Gordon?" the headmaster asked lightly with a twinkle in his eye. "Forgive my vanity, but I would much prefer to be among the elite in such a category." Ramsay shot him a bewildered, disgusted look. "Vanity I can forgive. It's everything else I can't stand." Dumbledore chuckled. "As I feared, you're still as stubborn as ever." "Very well, Gordon," I concede. "May I use your facilities before we go?" Ramsay crossed his arms, still holding the knife in his fist, and glared at Dumbledore suspiciously, but curtly inclined his head in a single nod toward the restroom in the back of the dining hall. "Thank you," said Dumbledore, and with a swish of his lilac robes, he turned and disappeared through the red restroom door. There was a short, palpable silence between Ramsay and Harry for a moment. Then Ramsay unfolded his arms and faced Harry with a more pleasant expression. "Are you hungry?" Harry blinked. "What? Are you hungry?" Ramsay repeated patiently. "We have some food left over from our meals today: beef Wellington, pumpkin soup, chicken cordon bleu with braised potatoes. I usually have my servers take it all home after work for dinner, so that we don't waste anything." "Oh no, I'm fine," Harry dissented firmly. Unfortunately, his stomach rumbled loudly just as he said it. Ramsay smiled. "Well, at the very least, I've got to let you taste my mint chocolate truffles. They're my specialty." He pulled out a chair for Harry, before settling down in another chair on the other side of the table. With a wave of his hand, his knife dissolved away into an unusually thick and long silver-tipped wand, and Ramsay waved it at the kitchen door. In an instant, a small plate came floating out of the kitchen and landed delicately on the table in front of Harry's chair. There were 5 small chocolate balls arranged neatly on the plate. "Go on, try one," Ramsay said gently. Still feeling reluctant, Harry slowly settled down in the chair and took one of the chocolate truffles from the plate. "Thank you," he mumbled. He popped it into his mouth. All at once it felt like his taste buds were swirling in a sea of creamy chocolate and cool, refreshing mint. It was delicious. The happy surprise must have shown on Harry's face, for Ramsay smiled more widely. "You like it?" "Yeah," said Harry. "It's really good." "Well, thank you," Ramsay replied. "I hoped you would." He picked up one of the truffles himself, turning it over in his hand as he studied it carefully. "When your parents got married, I sent them a whole box of these," Ramsay said absently. Harry was startled. "You knew my mum and dad?" Ramsay put the truffle down with a sad smile. "Yes, they were both quite a bit older than me, and I was too young to join the order during the war, but I played Quidditch against James for a year at Hogwarts. And I knew Lily through Professor Slughorn's old slug club. He was head of Slytherin House and potions professor back then. Old Codger loved to collect children that he could mentor and then receive favors from once they were successful. A pleasant enough chap, I suppose, but a bit materialistic for my taste." Harry frowned. "Well, if he was a Slytherin, I guess that's not surprising." "Easy now," Ramsay reproached gently. His tone was much less sharp. Honestly, since he'd started talking to Harry, Ramsay's tone had gained a wonderful down-to-earth, patient quality that reminded Harry of Lupin. "Don't give in to that silly old Gryffindor notion that all Slytherins are rotten. Every Slytherin, like every other student, is like a fresh tomato, full of potential, but also ripe for spoilage and bruising. That's why we must treat them gently, keep them well washed, partner them with others, and transform them into something amazing." Harry considered Ramsay carefully. "You sure didn't treat Professor Dumbledore very gently." Ramsay turned a bit more solemn. "The headmaster isn't a student, he's a professor, and a fully trained wizard with a lot of influence. Yet he makes it a point to hire many substandard teachers, not Minerva, Phileas, or Pomona, clearly, but they deserve better than the partners they've been forced to contend with. Dolor's Umbridge, a perfect monster of a woman. She should be down at the bottom of a well, not in a classroom with children. Gilderoy Lockhart, I knew him at Hogwarts. That dim-bulb trollop is so pathetic I dare say a Cornish pixie is braver." Harry snorted, remembering Lockhart's eventful first class, where indeed Lockhart was taken down by a swarm of pixies. "And that's not even touching Severus Snape," growled Ramsay. "How Dumbledore found it in his heart to hire him, I'll never know." Harry had to nod in agreement. "I don't know why he hired him either. I know Snape was a Death Eater, and Professor Dumbledore said he turned spy for the Order before the war was over, but I still don't trust him." Ramsay raised his eyebrows. "And why is that?" Harry didn't know where to start. Snape's bullying of him and his friends, his loathing of Gryffindor House overall, his blatant favoritism of Malfoy, his shady behavior, it was something that felt like it'd take forever to explain. "It's complicated," Harry said at last. Ramsay looked like he was thinking. "Do you like potions, Harry?" The question was abrupt. "Not really," answered Harry. "I mean, it's kind of hard to like it when you've got Snape breathing down your neck while you work, taking points from Gryffindor for no reason, and putting up all the Slytherins on a pedestal." This seemed to get Ramsay's attention. "He does that?" he asked, sounding both dismayed and sympathetic. The tone encouraged Harry to go on. "Yeah, you should see how he treats us. If anyone gets one little thing wrong, he uses it to shame them and sometimes the whole class. Like one time, he was picking on Neville Longbottom, he's a friend of mine, in Gryffindor, for his shrinking solution being wrong, and Snape decided he was going to feed Neville's potion to his toad Trevor at the end of class to see if it would work." Ramsay looked outraged. "See if it would work. Shrinking solution can be deathly poisonous if brewed incorrectly. To threaten to poison a student's pet when you're supposed to be teaching him, unbelievable." Harry continued. He felt vindicated in a way he hadn't felt in a long while, hearing Ramsay's reaction. "He picks on Gryffindors mostly, but he bullies Neville a lot. He doesn't like me very much. Because of my dad, so he doesn't like my friends much either. There was this one time, my friend Hermione, she's the brightest girl in our year, was trying to answer one of his questions, and Snape snapped at her that she was an insufferable know-it-all and made her cry." Ramsay looked disgusted. He brought his hands up to his face, covering his eyes and massaging his temples. "Good God!" The door to the restroom abruptly opened. Harry jumped, startled, as Dumbledore strode back over to them. "Ah, much better," the headmaster said smoothly. "Well, Harry, I suppose we've taken too much advantage of Gordon's hospitality. Time for us to move on." Harry immediately got to his feet. Ramsay stood as well, his face abruptly turning much harder as he faced Dumbledore again. "Dumbledore," he growled. "If you want me for the position, then I expect to be able to do things my way." Harry gaped. After all that, he was going to take the dark arts job. "But of course," Dumbledore replied pleasantly. "And I expect that you'll keep your stupid, broken nose out of my business while I fix the mess you've seen fit to make," Ramsay added, his voice rising, and he got right up in Dumbledore's face. "Duly noted." Dumbledore helped himself to one of Ramsay's truffles with a smile. "I look forward to seeing you when term starts, Professor Ramsay." With this, Harry and Dumbledore left the restaurant. "Professor." "Yes, Harry." "I don't understand," Harry said slowly. "The entire time we were here, Ramsay acted like he hated you, and then, after I told him about Snape and his classes, he decided to take the job. Why? Gordon has an incredibly strong moral compass," Dumbledore answered simply. "It's a trait that makes me wonder if he could have been an excellent Gryffindor. At school, though, of course, Gordon has said he's very content as a Hufflepuff, and colourfully told me where I may put my thoughts regarding his sorting. Regardless, if there's one thing that can convince Gordon to take on a project, it's incompetence on someone else's part." Harry blinked. "Wait, so he took the job because I told him Snape was a bad teacher?" "Knows he can be a better one," Dumbledore confirmed with a nod, his blue eyes twinkling. "Although your method is not exactly one I'd encourage, I had a feeling that you and Gordon might find enough common ground, that your presence might be enough to sway him." Once they had walked a good couple of feet from Hell's Kitchen, Dumbledore extended his arm again. "Come, Harry, the night awaits." Still feeling faintly bewildered, Harry nonetheless took hold of Dumbledore's arm, and the two disappeared once more. Chapter 2. Professor Ramsay. Chapter text: Dumbledore's announcement of Ramsay taking over potions, while Snape took on defense against the dark arts, was met with a lot of buzz from the student body. Snape had been incredibly smug about finally receiving the job he'd wanted for such a long time, and most of the Slytherins were rather thrilled about their head of house's success too. But the other half of the announcement, the part about Ramsay, also perked everyone's interest. It seemed that Gordon Ramsay had a bit of a reputation in the wizarding world. "He's known for his cookbooks mainly," Ron explained to Harry one evening at dinner. "But apparently he was this prodigy at Hogwarts, becoming Hufflepuff Quidditch captain at 14 and creating new potions while he was still at school. But then he got badly injured, and he decided to open up a restaurant instead. Mum's been dreaming of getting a reservation there for ages, but it's just so upscale. I wonder why he would just throw away all of his potential like that, Hermione said with a disapproving frown. I mean, imagine all the good you could do for the world if you're that good at potions. He does do a lot of good, Ron dissented. Sure, he's not exactly academic, but he's perfectly brilliant. He helps out restaurants that are about to go out of business, even if they're muggle places. Dad says he exclusively hires and trains squibs and muggle relatives of witches and wizards to work in his restaurant so that they can have stable employment in the wizarding world even if they can't use magic. That's awesome, said Harry, impressed despite himself. Yeah, said Ron. Only he's also known for being kind of scary. His temper is legendary, like, if you make a mistake, he can just go off on you. One time he visited this new restaurant that opened up in Diagon Alley a long while back, and he caused a big fuss in the dining room when he demanded to see the chef and roared for everyone to hear about how the lamb was drier than the crack of the guy's arse. Hermione gaped, clearly disgusted. That's utterly boorish. I can see it, said Harry, grinning despite himself. When I met Ramsay, he called Dumbledore a blasted numpty. Harry at first had thought that Hermione would just have to tell Ron and him how Ramsay's classes were. Since neither of them had gotten the O, they would have needed to continue. But Professor McGonagall came to find them later that morning, informing them that Ramsay was comfortable accepting high E's into his class, and so Ron and Harry would both be added to the roster. When Ron and Harry entered the dungeon where potions was normally held that day, they were surprised to find the room had been utterly transformed. The classroom, which, for as long as they could remember, had always been dank, dark, and damp, with poor greenish lighting and grotesque trinkets lined up on the bookcases, was now clean and well lit. Ramsay had redecorated the walls with many different-colored potion bottles, as well as various ingredients that had to have come fresh from the Hogwarts greenhouses, including several potted mandrakes and glass jars full of shrivel figs. There were also 4 clean bronze cauldrons set up in the aisles between the students' desks. At the front of the classroom, sitting behind a much cleaner cherrywood desk that had replaced Snape's, was Ramsay, dressed in high-collared robes, just as perfectly white as his chef's uniform back at Hell's Kitchen. His silver-tipped wand sat comfortably in a belt loop in the waist of his robes, and his sleeves were once again rolled up as if he was ready to get to work. "Good morning, everyone," he greeted with a broad smile. The students all mumbled various incarnations of hello and good morning. Ramsay got up, propping himself up with his hands on the desk as he looked around at the class. "All right, first of all," he said in a more businesslike tone, "when I greet you or ask you something, I expect a proper response. You will address me as Professor, and I would like to hear words and not mumbles, so let's try that again. Good morning." "Good morning, Professor," the class replied a little uncomfortably. "Better," Ramsay granted mildly. "Could do with some improvement. But I suppose that's what the school year is for." He came around to stand in front of his desk, clapping his hands together in satisfaction. "Now then, welcome to Potions. You are now all officially NEWT students. I know that must feel like an accomplishment. The OWL exams are easily the most stressful ones you'll ever have to take. So now that you've overcome that hurdle, you know that you are capable enough in potions to function in the wizarding world. Unfortunately, if you want to be more than just capable, if you want to pursue a career that requires potions, like one in the ministry or at St. Mungo's, you're only just getting started. You'll be putting in a lot of work this year. But the fun part about NEWT level potions is that, unlike your previous classes, we will not be using our textbook very much. Textbooks, in the end, are crutches for real hard work. This year we'll be learning about the intuition that comes with potion making. Now you can start learning about the subtleties of the ingredients, which ones mix well and which ones don't, and developing your own instincts so as to improve your work rather than just blindly follow instructions. The class's focus remained solidly on Ramsay as he talked, devoting nothing but rapt attention to him. Hermione suddenly looked a little nervous. She was a good student largely because of her photographic memory and her meticulous observance of the school textbooks. Telling Hermione to take cues from something other than a book would be like telling Snape to wash his greasy hair. "I have 3 potions I want to share with you today," said Ramsay. "We'll be studying each of them in depth over the course of the term." He withdrew his wand from the belt of his robes and pointed it at the leftmost cauldron, which looked like it was filled with simple tap water. In an instant, it floated along the aisle so that everyone could see and smell it. "Can anyone tell me what potion this is?" Ramsay asked. Hermione's hand immediately shot into the air. "Your name, my dear," said Ramsay. "Hermione Granger, sir." Ramsay's eyes flickered very briefly to Harry. He then nodded politely at Hermione. "Very nice to meet you." "And the potion is called Veritaserum," Hermione answered at once very quickly. "I could tell because of its clear consistency and its lack of odor, making it virtually undetectable when placed in food and drink," Ramsay finished for her, smiling wryly. "Very good, darling, 5 points to Gryffindor. Yes, as Hermione said, this is truth potion. Not infallible, of course. There are ways to combat it, should you find yourself drugged with it, but still an excellent way to force the truth out of people." He lowered his wand, gently floating the cauldron with Veritaserum back to where it had been. He then turned to the next cauldron, levitating it around the room. This one was full of a bubbling, mud-like mixture that Harry recognized at once, but Hermione's hand was already in the air, so he stayed quiet. "Yes, Hermione," said Ramsay, his eyebrows raised. "Would you like to tell us which one this is?" "Polyjuice potion, sir," Hermione replied promptly. "It helps a witch or wizard take on the form of another." "Excellent. Take 5 more points for Gryffindor. Polyjuice potion must be individually brewed for it to work properly. It doesn't keep very well long-term, and you must also have some sort of material from whomever you'd like to impersonate, like a hair or a toenail. Perfectly ghastly stuff." With another casual flick of his wand, Ramsay lowered the cauldron back down and turned to the third. This one, which was filled with a shiny, whitish potion, let off wonderful, fragrant fumes as it floated down the aisles. Harry distinctly picked out the scents of treacle tart, the fresh wood of a new broomstick handle, and something flowery he thought he might have smelled at the burrow. Hermione's hand once again punched the air, and Ramsay actually laughed. "All right, darling, tell us what it is." Hermione blushed a little, smiling shyly. "A Mortentia. It's the most powerful love potion in the world." All the girls in the classroom visibly straightened up, looking over the potion with renewed interest. 5 points, Gordon said casually. "Though honestly, calling a Mortentia or any other variation a love potion is something of a misnomer. No magic can perfectly recreate love. It's more of an infatuation potion, illogical, high energy, and very powerful. But be warned if you're considering brewing one of these. Even when brewed correctly, they cause a lot more problems than they solve. I can assure you of that." He turned to face the class more fully, waving his wand at the board so that it flipped over, revealing the organized instructions written on it. Along the top were the words, "Draft of the Living Death." Before Ramsay could speak again, however, a Slytherin girl with her hair braided around her head like a crown, sitting in the back, raised her hand. "Your name, please, darling," said Ramsay. "Daphne Greengrass, Professor," the girl replied curtly. "You didn't tell us about that potion." She pointed at the fourth and smallest cauldron. Ramsay smiled widely. "I most certainly did not. 5 points to Slytherin for reminding me. This one is a little special, if I do say so myself." He levitated the cauldron with his wand, floating it over toward Hermione's desk. The liquid frothed bronze with streaks of gold and silver, swirling around in the pewter basin as if there were little goldfish swimming in spirals just under the surface. "Do you recognize it, Hermione?" Ramsay asked amusedly. Hermione, for once, looked lost for words. Looking perfectly ashamed, she shook her head. "Oh, now, love, don't wilt on me," Ramsay said gently. "I'm sure even a fully trained witch would have some difficulty with this one. There's no need to be disappointed." He turned to the rest of the class. "This is my own variation of an incredibly rare and complex potion that you can find in the very back of your textbook. The original brew has much more of a golden color. I merely warmed the Ashwender eggs over a fire before adding them, counteracted the roux with a sprig of peppermint, and added a good clockwise turn of the cauldron after stirring to help the ingredients set, so as to make the potion's effects last longer and reduce any potentially uncomfortable side effects." Hermione's eyes lit up, and she quickly raised her hand, almost bouncing in her seat with excitement. "Did you figure it out, Hermione?" asked Ramsay. "It's Felix Felicis," she answered eagerly. "Liquid luck." The entire class straightened up at once, immediately interested. Even Draco Malfoy, who had been notably quiet and disinterested during the entire class, seemed to gain a little more light in his grey eyes. "Very good," Ramsay said with a broad smile. 10 points to Gryffindor. Felix Felicis is a potion that is highly regulated. It's illegal to use them for any sort of competition or game, and even using it too much in a single lifetime can lead to dangerous overconfidence and even madness. But in small doses, it can give you some of the best luck you'll ever have in your life. I've only had it once myself, on my birthday, and by the end of it, I met the woman who is now my fiancée. So yes, pretty nice all around. The small cauldron finally floated back down to the ground, and Ramsay casually placed a hand on the rim, his face growing a little more serious. "We won't be brewing Felix Felicis this year, as even fully trained potion masters have immense difficulty with it. But I brewed this for you for 2 reasons. I wanted to demonstrate for you how you can take a potion and safely modify it. You can do this with anything as simple as a ball-curing potion or as complicated as this, as long as you do it carefully and after putting in the proper amount of study and thought. 2. I wanted to give you something to work for in this lesson. Today we'll be working on the draft of the Living Death, which is a rather tricky potion. I want you to use this recipe and your own intuition to try to brew your own draft. The draft is only dangerous when it is brewed correctly, so it'll be very hard for you to cause much damage if you make a mistake. The best attempt tonight will receive a tiny vial of Felix Felicis, good for 24 hours of good luck. We will then also do this exact same test again at the end of the year, and another tiny vial will be given to the student whose potion has improved the most. You will have 1 hour to finish your potion. Your time starts now. By the end of the class, Harry had won the Felix Felicis, with a little help from the old, battered textbook he'd found in the cabinet. He had felt a bit guilty seeing how upset Hermione was about her own lackluster potion, and having lost the challenge, but he had to admit it had felt so good when Ramsay beamed proudly at him and offhandedly mentioned that his mother had been awfully good at potions too. It was a little underhanded. But for the first time in his life, Harry actually did well at potions. That brightened his mood enough that he could overlook the rest, at least for right now. Chapter 3. The Confrontation. Chapter text. Within a few weeks, potions had quickly become many students' favorite subject. Professor Ramsay, despite his very high standards, was always there to offer a helping hand if someone was having trouble with their work. He'd shown none of his infamous temper to his students, even when he was severely tested. There was a story circulating in late September about a Muggle-born first year who had accidentally spilled his incomplete, boiling hot potion on Ramsay's foot. But instead of going off on the boy, Ramsay simply helped the boy clean up the mess and hobbled back to his desk on 1 foot without raising his voice in the slightest. I heard he didn't even go to Madame Pomfrey afterwards. Harry heard one first-year squeak when she was recounting the story for her friends at the Gryffindor table. Once class was over, he just hobbled around his office on 1 foot, making his own healing potion. Said he liked washing down those sorts of potions with a good cup of hot chocolate, rather than just taking it out of a bottle. It wasn't until early October that everyone really got to see Ramsay's temper in action. It all started when Ramsay was heading down to the Hogwarts greenhouses. He had intended to ask Professor Sprout about the condition of her moonseed and belladonna plants, for he thought having those materials fresh in 2 of his upcoming classes would be helpful. When he arrived at the greenhouse, however, he found that he was early, for neither Professor Sprout nor her class had arrived yet. There was only one person there, a young man of about 16 with a chubby, round face who was tending to a gnarled stump-like plant. Ramsay was very quiet in his approach, since he didn't want to startle the boy as he delicately extracted a pulsating green pod from inside the plant. "I'm impressed," Ramsay said at last, once the boy had withdrawn his hand. The boy jumped. When he turned around, his face went very white. "Professor Ramsay." "I don't usually see students that confident around a Snargaluff plant," Ramsay said with a small smile. Terribly venomous little buggers. I've always needed an extra set of hands whenever I've worked with one. Ramsay sat down on the bench next to the boy, who was as stiff as a board. Here, would it help if I held the pot while you extract those? I seem to recall they like to be rocked. The boy, still seeming very nervous, nonetheless gave a weak little nod. Ramsay picked up the plant, bringing it into his lap and rocking it very slowly back and forth as if it were an infant, and after a minute the boy went back to slowly extracting the pods. "What's your name, young man?" asked Ramsay. "Neville Longbottom," he replied lowly. A gleam of recognition flickered through Ramsay's eyes. "Nice to meet you." There was something odd in his voice, something bubbling under the surface. Was it pity? Was it sadness? Neville wasn't really sure. But whatever it was, Ramsay quickly forced it from his tone when he spoke again. "So, Neville, you're in 6th year then?" "Yes, sir," Neville answered. "Amazing," Ramsay said admiringly. "If I'd been so good at handling a dangerous plant like this at 16, I dare say I would be a herbology professor today." Neville flushed a dark red. Thank you, sir," he said, pleasantly surprised by the compliment. "It's a shame I don't have you in my class," Ramsay said lightly. "I would love to see what you could do in potions with your talent for herbology." Neville's smile slid off his face in a second, and he looked away uncomfortably. "Oh, you really wouldn't. I'm terrible at potions." "Really?" Ramsay asked, raising an eyebrow. "Seems to me herbology and potions work hand in hand." "Not for me," Neville said embarrassedly. "I've just never gotten the hang of it. I actually was sort of happy not to take potions this year." His voice petered away into a low mumble. "At least until I found out that Professor Snape was teaching defense against the dark arts." Ramsay's face devolved into a sour frown, and he snorted disapprovingly. "Yes, well, Dumbledore does make some very interesting job appointments. But I'll grant that Snape, of all the people who work for Dumbledore, does likely know the dark arts better than anyone. Though I find his temperament rather deplorable. Is it true he blatantly favors his own house over the others?" "Ma'am," Neville assented with a nod. "And that he bullies his students." Neville gave something of a low, humorless laugh under his breath. "That's putting it lightly." Ramsay relaxed slightly, his face becoming more sympathetic and attentive. Clearly he was ready to listen, and that expression encouraged Neville to go on. "I mean, that's part of why I just decided I wasn't going to work hard to get a potions owl. If I got one, then Gran would insist I continue taking it, and I don't know, I couldn't do it anymore. I've had to take classes with Professor Snape every single week for 5 years, biting my tongue and cowering whenever he called me an idiot or took points off me or ridiculed my potions in front of the whole class. I don't want to do that anymore. So I wasn't going to take potions this year. I wasn't going to deal with him anymore. But then he took over defense against the dark arts, which I really like. Harry trained us in defense last year, when Umbridge had taken over the whole school, and I really want to do well in it, particularly with what's going on right now. So now I've just got to suck it all up again, just to pass the class and learn everything I need to know." By the time he'd finished speaking, Neville looked flushed and frustrated, like he'd been keeping his feelings bottled up for a long time and had finally been able to let them all out. Ramsay was visibly disturbed, but he kept his face purposefully stony as he put the Snargaluff plant back on the table. "Neville, thank you for telling me this," he said, and although his tone faintly betrayed the anger he felt, he kept it as gentle as he could. "I know it was hard, and I'm very, very sorry you had to deal with that. It's not your fault, and it's not fair, and I want you to know I do not think you are any sort of idiot. Okay?" Neville gave a laugh, choking back a few tears. "Thanks, Professor," Ramsay nodded. Clapping Neville on the back, he then got to his feet. "Now, forgive me, but I have some business to attend to back at the castle. Have a good class, Neville." Although Ramsay tried to project a level of cool, however, Neville couldn't help but watch him leave with a little bit of uncertainty. Ramsay's hand was running over the silver-tipped wand, comfortably sitting in the loop on his belt, and it was visibly twitching. When Ramsay headed back to the castle, he strode very quickly and with aggressive purpose. Several students heading off to class actually had to dart out of the way so that Ramsay wouldn't ram into them. When Ramsay approached the great hall, he caught sight of a familiar dark-robed figure just outside the large double doors. "Snape!" Snape turned, and his black eyes grew very cold as they fell on Ramsay. The white-robed potions professor strode right up to the black-robed defense against the dark arts professor, looking visibly angry. "I want a word right now," demanded Ramsay. "Oh," said Snape, raising his eyebrows coolly. "Don't you have plenty of your own, Rams? You always have such colorful turns of phrase." Ramsay's eyes flashed dangerously. "Oh, piss off. I have met some real shit stains in my time, but you, Snape, are beyond the pale. And what sin of mine merits that distinction?" Snape asked, though he sounded perfectly disinterested. "Your treatment of Neville Longbottom," Ramsay stated harshly. "I've just learned that you have been actively and personally bullying that poor boy for the last 5 years. Called him an idiot, threatened to poison his toad, openly mocked him in front of his classmates. According to Neville, he even deliberately failed his potions owl because he didn't want to be pressured to continue taking your fucking class." The students in the Great Hall had all hushed inside to listen. Even other students from outside the hall had backtracked slightly so they could watch the argument. Snape's black eyes flickered menacingly. "Longbottom has always been a hopeless student, which you would be aware of if you ever had the pleasure of teaching him," he snapped. "Pleasure of teach? Oh, shut the fuck up," said Ramsay, his voice rising. "Threatening your students doesn't teach them a damn thing. Giving your own students favoritism for doing fuck all teaches them even less." "I have my teaching methods, and you have yours," Snape replied icily. "Perhaps you should remember which one of us has been teaching longer." "Fuck off, you fucking fruit bat," Ramsay roared. Ramsay and Snape were now mere inches from each other, with Ramsay getting right up in Snape's face. Snape had always been rather tall compared to the other professors, so it was a little surreal seeing someone exactly his height pointing a finger and yelling at him without having to look up at all. "You want to talk about how long you've been teaching?" "All right then, lost your first job in 81, after your old boss, you know, who got pummeled the first time." "Watch your tongue, Ramsay," snarled Snape, his yellowish teeth bared. But Ramsay pressed on, undeterred. "Got hired here by some fucking miracle, taught children for almost 15 fucking years, and then somehow in all of that time, never bloody figured out that you teach classes not to stroke your own ego, but to actually teach the goddamn fucking classes." "I will not listen to some second-rate cook telling me how to teach," barked Snape. "No one else is brave enough to do it, so I guess you'll fucking well have to, you donkey-faced tosser," shouted Ramsay. "Bravery," sneered Snape. "So says the man who, even after learning about the Dark Lord's return, refused to stand and fight. You wouldn't know bravery if it stung you in the face, Ramsay." This clearly got under Ramsay's skin. His face paled, his eyes went a little wider, and his fists clenched. "You pathetic, mold-infested dickhole," he snarled. "So you fought in the wars. Good on you, you fuck-up. That still doesn't excuse you being a fucking twat to your students." "In your modest opinion," Snape said sardonically. "Again, I have trouble taking advice from someone who screams like a child because he's too immature to contain his emotions." Ramsay gaped, looking shocked and furious. "Oh my fucking God, mate, are you serious? I'm the immature one." "Remind me again, who out of the two of us is so determined to hate Harry Potter simply because his deceased father once hung him up by the ankle when they were kids?" Bang! Snape had whipped out his wand, and in a blast of white light Gordon Ramsay was flung across the room, colliding with a suit of armor on the other side of the hallway. Ramsay took out his wand also, prepared to fight back, but a moment later 2 large, translucent shields had appeared around them. "That is enough." Professor McGonagall had arrived. She strode over to stand between Snape and Ramsay, her wand in hand both raised and her expression very severe. "Professors," she reproached them, her voice quiet but incredibly cold, "I highly advise that you both return to your offices and keep your distance from each other for the remainder of the day. Am I understood?" "Minerva," Ramsay started. "Am I understood, Professor Ramsay?" McGonagall repeated, looking very stern. Ramsay swallowed, his eyes flaring furiously at Snape over McGonagall's shoulder. Then he looked at McGonagall, and exhaling loudly in aggravation, he lowered his wand, turned on his heel, and stomped away. McGonagall's face softened ever so slightly as she watched him leave. She understood why Ramsay was so upset, but he had acted inappropriately. As deputy headmistress, she knew the importance of the professors retaining self-control during these difficult times. And admittedly, she knew they were in no place to fight amongst themselves, given the bigger enemies they had to face. McGonagall turned to Snape, whose cold black eyes were blazing just as much as Ramsay's had been as he lowered his wand. "I'm very disappointed in you, Severus," she told him baldly. "I would have thought that in Dumbledore's absence you would be more focused on holding the fort than engaging in petty squabbles." Snape held McGonagall's gaze for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly, before turning on his heel just as Ramsay had and sweeping away without a word. The Transfiguration Professor turned to the students who had gathered on the staircases and in the doorway of the great hall to watch the fight. "Move along now, all of you," she said sharply. "Get to your classes." Everyone quickly dispersed. They could tell McGonagall was in no mood for disobedience. Chapter 4. Cady Bell. Chapter text The blow-up between Snape and Ramsay was on the lips of every student in school for the first 2 weeks of October. There were rumors swirling that Ramsay had later blown up at Dumbledore and that Dumbledore had spoken to Snape directly about it. Harry believed the gossip, as Snape had been noticeably irritable in all of his classes, but had also refrained from much of his usual bullying. He still would never give Gryffindor points, but at least he wasn't actively taking them at every opportunity. He also very pointedly ignored everything Neville did in defense against the dark arts, good, bad, or indifferent, though judging by the ferocious glares he'd occasionally shoot in the boy's direction, it was clear that he hated holding his tongue. Neville, for his part, thoroughly enjoyed the change in behavior. "At least he's not yelling," he told Harry with a shrug and an almost wry smile. It wasn't until the first Hogsmeade weekend of the year that there was something else to talk about. When Hagrid carried the unconscious Cady Bell back to the castle, Professors McGonagall and Snape appeared immediately to investigate the cursed necklace Cady had touched. After taking testimony from the witnesses, Leanne, Harry, Ron, and Hermione, McGonagall reconvened a meeting in the staff room with the other professors. Dumbledore arrived a few minutes after the rest of the teachers, taking a seat at the head of the staff table, right between Professors McGonagall and Snape, and looked around at everyone. "Today in Hogsmeade," the headmaster said gravely, "a Gryffindor student came into the possession of a cursed necklace. From what we have learned from witnesses, she was a victim of the Imperious Curse, which commanded her to take the necklace to the castle in an attempt to cause more damage. Unfortunately, she accidentally touched the necklace herself, and so was subjected to its dark magic." The other teachers reacted with alarm. Professor Burbage, the Muggle Studies professor, had gone very white. Ramsay shot forward in his seat, grabbing the edge of the table. "She's all right," Dumbledore reassured before Ramsay could ask. "Her hand only grazed the chain. Miss Bell has been sent to St. Mungo's, but the healers there expect her to make a full recovery." Ramsay closed his mouth and shifted back in his seat, though his forehead was still creased with concern. "Who gave Miss Bell the necklace, headmaster?" Burbage asked in a hushed voice. "As of yet, we do not know," Dumbledore said quietly. "But we shall be putting more precautions in place so as to raise awareness and promote safety in Hogsmeade Village. The war is still raging, professors. However safe our school and its grounds may be, we must remain ever vigilant." Ramsay exchanged a solemn look with the arithmancy teacher, Professor Vector, who sat to his left. When he spoke up, his voice was brisk. "Dumbledore, if Cady was given that necklace in Hogsmeade, then we need to halt all student outings there until we find the person responsible." Professor Flitwick glanced from Ramsay to Dumbledore in concern. "Surely there's no need for that," the tiny man squeaked, "if higher security is enacted." "We can't know if that extra security'll do any good unless we risk the student's safety," Ramsay cut him off seriously. "Cady was lucky this time, who is to say the next one will be likewise?" "But," Professor Sprout interjected, looking concerned as well, "to take away all Hogsmeade privileges for every student. Going to Hogsmeade is so important to them. It'd no doubt feel like a punishment." "Pomona's right, Gordon," said Burbage gently. "Our students need to get out of the castle to mingle, to have fun. With how bad everything is right now, they need that escape. Charity, love, this is an issue of safety," Ramsay argued. "Fun is all well and good, but we cannot allow these children we've been entrusted with get wrapped up in a war they made no choice to fight in." Snape gave a low snort under his breath. Ramsay's eyes went to him like a shot. "Something you'd like to say, Snape?" he said in a challenging tone. The smirk on Snape's face slid off as easily as if he had wiped it off with a napkin. "These students are in the war, whether they choose it or not," he said seriously. "There are wolves prowling at our gate, and they'll have to be ready to face them. Locking all of our students up in the castle, even in the name of safety, will not do them much good in the long term." Ramsay's eyes narrowed. This school was not made to churn out little soldiers, it's to teach, and these children's parents expect us to protect them while we do so. "No protection we provide will ever be foolproof," Snape said sharply. "Better that they learn to be vigilant now, rather than cripple them through coddling." "Maybe you're all right sending out children to die for your cause, Snape, but I am sure as hell not," Ramsay snapped. "I'm well aware of how comfortable you've been, Ramsay," sneered Snape, "staying in your own little bubble for the last 2 years, pretending that nothing is happening, but the time for that is long since through. If you want to fight me, that's fine, but don't you fucking dare scold me for looking after these kids' best interest, you mangy tit," Ramsay snapped, getting sharply to his feet. "Enough." Dumbledore shut both of them down without raising his voice at all. "Severus, I would ask that you cease demonizing Gordon's reluctance to join the Order when I first asked it of him. He was more than within his rights to decline my offer. And Gordon, please control your temper. No one here has any intention of endangering the children of this school." Ramsay whirled on Dumbledore, his eyes flashing. "Oh yeah. Remind me who in this room, upon the Chamber of Secrets being opened, and a bunch of students getting petrified, kept the bloody school open anyway? Gordon." McGonagall snapped at him fiercely. Ramsay went silent, still fuming as he slowly settled back down in his chair. Dumbledore looked at Ramsay with nothing but indulgence and patience. "Gordon is right." The professors looked startled. "Headmaster," started Sprout. "Considering we do not know where the threat in Hogsmeade originated," Dumbledore said quietly, "perhaps it would be best, at least until the culprit is identified, to temporarily halt all student trips. I will make the announcement at dinner this evening." Dumbledore stood. After a moment, the other teachers followed suit and started to file out of the room. Ramsay and Snape shot daggers at each other, but otherwise moved along. Ramsay left the room, Professor Vector just ahead of him. "You won't keep your job long if you keep mouthing off like that," Vector said with a cool smile. Ramsay snorted. "If they can't handle the truth, that's their problem, not mine." "It'll be your problem too, if you lose your job," Vector pointed out. "I know you'll always have your restaurant to go back to, but I don't think your students would be too pleased, would they?" Ramsay glanced at Vector out the corner of his eye, and then with a low sigh acknowledged her words with a single nod. "I suppose." Burbage came up on Ramsay's other side so as to join their conversation. She was much smaller than both Ramsay and Vector, so she had to walk a little faster to keep up with their longer strides. "We understand your passion, Gordon, truly," said Burbage. "It might just be wiser to use it more productively." Ramsay raised his eyebrows. "I seem to recall hearing that advice before, though you were even shorter then. And I was having to threaten you with detention so that you wouldn't beat up Darny Garf," Burbage replied lightly. "Darny Garf was no one worth defending," Vector said, her eyes flashing. "I should know, given that I slept in the bunk under him for 7 years." Ramsay smiled wryly. "Felt pretty good on graduation day to be out of there, eh? You have no idea," Vector sighed, rolling her eyes up toward the ceiling. Burbage smiled slightly, then her expression turned much more pensive. "What I want to know is, who gave Miss Bell that necklace? I can't imagine anyone living in Hogsmeade being a Death Eater, so it must have been someone coming in from outside." "Not necessarily," Vector said solemnly. "There could be Death Eater sympathizers in the village, people acting as spies, since they're such a fixture that no one would suspect." "No," Burbage dissented. "We know those people, Septima Aberforth, Charlene Theophilus Rosmutter. They all hate the Death Eaters." "I don't believe any one of them would betray Hogwarts, betray Dumbledore." "I agree," said Ramsay. "And because of that, I have faith that they'll help us find out who gave Cady that necklace and catch him. If the person is a Death Eater, catching him might prove difficult," Vector pointed out. "True," said Burbage. "But at least if we know who it was, we can take steps. Keep an eye out for that person, take advantage of his weaknesses. Like Fenrir Greyback, he might be terrifying, but his magical talents are limited. And Avery may be excellent at wizard dueling, but he's notoriously dim-witted. Vector sighed. Well, we'll see. I suppose the most important thing to do in desperate times is to stay positive. Ramsay bid both of his co-workers goodbye as they headed up into the towers to start their next classes, while he headed down toward the dungeons. Even as he tried to focus on his class, however, he could not force the concern from his mind. When the first Wizarding War was going on, he'd still been in school. He was only in his 6th year when the Potters died, when the Longbottoms were driven into insanity, when the Prowett brothers were killed in the height of battle, when Dorcas Meadows was taken down by the Dark Lord personally, when Robert McGonagall was devoured whole by a blast of fiendfire, when Marlene McKinnon and her entire family were slaughtered, when Benji Fenwick was blown to smithereens. All of them were so young. They'd all joined the Order right out of school, and had all died before they'd turned 25. Every single one of them. And Ramsay never forgave Dumbledore for leading so many people he'd admired, and sometimes even befriended to their doom. It didn't matter what the cause was, Ramsay hated the Death Eaters just as much as anyone. But they still had had families and friends and communities, and those were all destroyed upon their deaths. It was the responsibility of the world's elders to defend the world, to protect the young, and help them thrive. No young person should have to be obligated to fix an older one's mistakes. Those people, those young, idealistic people, had put their loyalty and faith in Dumbledore. And Ramsay thought Dumbledore showed them no such loyalty in return. How much did he share with them? How much did he put the Order's members' well-being over the so-called greater good, more than anything? Ramsay just wanted no other students, upon leaving Hogwarts, to have to die carrying Dumbledore's banner into battle. Chapter 5, Hogsmeade. Chapter text: The mood at Hogwarts was considerably despondent after Dumbledore's announcement ending Hogsmeade visits. It soon was circulated around school that it had been Professor Ramsay's suggestion, so the student body's favorable impression of Hogwarts's newest teacher had cooled significantly. Ramsay's classes had become noticeably tense, with many students refusing to answer his questions and speaking to him in very clipped, overly formal sentences. Hermione, of course, was one of the few who treated Ramsay with the usual amount of courtesy. As November came and went, and Hogsmeade visits were still non-existent, even Harry found himself feeling some bitterness toward Ramsay. He still did well in potions thanks to the prince's book, but he took much less pride in it. He was just glad that he'd been able to get Ron into shape for their Quidditch match against Slytherin. At least Quidditch was one small escape from classes and news from the war against Voldemort. The first week of December, Harry, Ron, and Hermione got up early to see if there were any Hogsmeade announcements on the Gryffindor notice board. When they arrived, they found a large crowd already gathered around it. Ginny emerged from the fold, and at the sight of them, she shook her head. Still no dates, she grumbled. Oh, come on, said Ron angrily. It's almost Christmas. I guess we'll just have to order our gifts by owl, Hermione said quietly. Ginny crossed her arms grumpily and sighed. At least Ramsay didn't get it in his head to ban Quidditch, I guess. See you later. She headed off through the portrait hole, presumably to get to breakfast. They'd find the culprit if they just questioned Malfoy, Harry muttered to Hermione, and Hermione groaned in exasperation. Harry, Professor McGonagall said Malfoy was in detention with her. He couldn't have been in Hogsmeade. I know he had something to do with it, Harry insisted. What he said on the train, about joining Voldemort, I'm very familiar with your theory, Harry, after the couple hundred times you've told it to us. Hermione cut him off tartly. And I think you need to let it go. Seeing the tenseness between his two friends, Ron swiftly shifted gears. This whole thing wouldn't even be so bad if Ramsay hadn't flown so off the handle about it, he sighed. I mean, we could try to catch the culprit and still go to Hogsmeade, right? Hermione frowned uncomfortably. Well, it was clearly out of concern for us, wasn't it? Yes, it was. A little harsh. But the choice does make sense if you think about it. It only makes sense if you haven't been at Hogwarts in the last decade, Ron corrected her. It's not like there are Death Eaters passing out cursed necklaces every other week. Yeah, maybe Hogsmeade got a bit complacent, didn't put up the kind of security measures everyone else has, since they figured they'd be safe out here in the middle of nowhere. But that doesn't mean the whole place is dangerous. Harry nodded. Right. Death Eaters could be anywhere when we're outside of school. We just have to be careful, that's all. Pouting slightly, Hermione returned her focus to her charm's homework. "It is a shame we won't be able to go to Hogsmeade for our Christmas shopping," she acknowledged sadly. When Potions class was over that day, Ramsay gave them the treat of no homework over the winter holidays. Although it did relieve the sixth years somewhat, there was still a faintly bitter note as the class filed out. "Harry," Ramsay said abruptly, "may I see you after class, please?" Faintly startled, Harry glanced at Ron and Hermione. Then, nodding at them to go ahead, he waited until everyone had filed out and then walked uncomfortably over to Ramsay's desk. "Yes, Professor?" asked Harry. Ramsay leaned up against the back of his desk, crossing his arms loosely over his chest. "That was some match last week," he said lightly. Harry blinked. "Oh, thank you." Ramsay studied Harry carefully as if he were x-raying him. Harry almost felt like he was talking to Snape for a second. "Your friend Ron in particular did very well. That last goal he saved by flipping upside down, perfectly brilliant." Harry felt very confused and faintly uncomfortable, so he waited for Ramsay to continue. "You do remember, Harry, that I told you that the use of Felix Felicis for any competition or game is against the law," Ramsay said solemnly. "What?" said Harry. Then it dawned on him. "Oh no, Professor, you don't understand." He took out the tiny Felix bottle from his robes. It was still perfectly stoppered and full. "It was a bluff," Harry explained guiltily, as Ramsay took it from him and examined it. "I made Ron think I'd put it in to help his confidence. He's really a great keeper, but he just gets so nervous and doubts himself so much that it hurts his performance. I thought if I could show him that he is that good, even without luck potion, well, then he'd see what I've always seen in him," he finished a bit lamely. Ramsay looked from the tiny bottle to up at Harry. Then his face softened noticeably, with his lips curling up in a wry smile. "And he did. Very clever, Harry." Harry smiled slightly in relief. "Thank you, sir." Ramsay handed the little bottle back to Harry. "I'm sorry for my suspicion. I saw the bottle in your hand when you were talking to Ron the day of the match, and after seeing the game, well, I admit, I was concerned. James would certainly never have cheated to win a match, but he would have done just about anything to help his friends." Harry's smile widened. "What position did you play?" he asked curiously, unable to help himself. "Keeper, actually," Ramsay answered. "That's why I was so impressed with Ron's performance. I was almost reminded of myself for a second." "Ron would be pleased to know that," Harry said with a grin. "He said you were something of a prodigy at Quidditch." Ramsay grinned too. "Oh, really? Well, I don't know if I'd go that far, but I was much more than competent, certainly." He then moved to sit behind his desk, adjusting a stack of essays he'd collected. "All right, Harry, that was all. You're free to go." Taking the hint, Harry turned to leave, but something made him hesitate. After a short moment, he turned back to Ramsay. "Professor." "Yes, Harry." Harry bit his lip. Part of him really wanted to tell Ramsay about Malfoy, but Hermione's disdain was still fresh in his ears, and it made him give pause. So instead he decided to say, "Is it true you suggested the Hogsmeade ban to Dumbledore?" Ramsay frowned deeply. He put down the essay he'd been ready to start grading. "Yes, I did. If there are Death Eaters in Hogsmeade, then I don't think it's right that any of you be placed in harm's way." "Yeah. But we're always going to be a little in harm's way," Harry said slowly. "I mean, a war's going on, and you all are not fighting in it," Ramsay said gravely. "You are students who need to focus on your future and your dreams for it. The ministry and your teachers are the ones responsible for your safety. They should be the ones worrying about it." "But sometimes the ministry and the teachers can't deal with it," said Harry. "Sometimes we have to do things ourselves. If we hadn't had Hogsmeade trips, we would never have formed the DA last year. It's somewhere where we can be free to try new things and have a laugh." Ramsay folded his hands seriously. "Harry, I understand why you're upset, but your safety is more important than you having fun. We professors are responsible for you, and even if the other professors haven't always acted like it, I'm going to." Harry opened his mouth to argue further, but Ramsay shut him down. "If you're going to ask me to tell the headmaster that I've changed my mind and that we should reinstate Hogsmeade trips, then I'm sorry, but my answer is no." Harry stared Ramsay down for a moment. Then, his green eyes narrowing, he tossed his school bag over his shoulder. "Happy Christmas, Professor," he said coldly. He strode out of the classroom, shutting the door sharply behind him and leaving Ramsay alone. Chapter 6. Ramsay's Announcement. Chapter text: As Christmas approached, the air in the castle was dark. Flitwick and Hagrid went all out with the decorations by decking every one of the gigantic Christmas trees with thousands of live pixies and sparkling garlands. But alas, being locked up in the castle had dampened everyone's mood. On the day before Christmas break, Dumbledore started breakfast with a round of usual morning announcements. Just when the students assumed he was going to finish and start breakfast, however, Dumbledore paused. Then, with a faintly amused smile, he turned his head slightly to indicate Ramsay, who sat 3 seats to his left between Professors Vector and Sprout. Finally, Professor Ramsay has a special announcement to share with you all. Ramsay rose to his feet, looking out at the students of the hall. Their eyes bore into him with both hesitance and suspicion. With the headmaster's permission, Ramsay addressed everyone, putting on his best smile despite the lack of pleasantry in his audience. I am pleased to announce that this January and February, Hogwarts will be hosting its very first Magic Junior competition. The students released little outbursts of surprise. On the second day of term, Ramsay continued, we will take applicants, and by the end of the week, we will have narrowed our competitors down to a top 12 of best student cooks. Those cooks will be excused from all homework while enrolled in the competition, and each week they will have to cook our panel of judges a spectacular dish that fits a theme of our choice. The winner of Magic Junior will not only earn 200 points for their house, everyone at the student tables gave a great gasp of delight, but they will also win 5,000 galleons prize money and a free meal for their family at Hell's Kitchen in Wandsworth Green. By the time the announcement was complete, every student in the hall was chattering in excitement. Ramsay beamed. If you wish to compete, brush up on your best recipes, your herbs and spices, and your cooking and baking flair over Christmas break. Auditions will be held in the dungeons on January 3rd, and you'll have to bake me a fresh batch of your best holiday biscuits for a chance to get into the top 12. Good luck to you all. He sat down, and Dumbledore led the students in a round of applause. We look very forward to tasting your efforts, Dumbledore said with a small smile. In the meantime, however, I do believe I have left you all in suspense long enough. He flourished his hands at the tables, and they were suddenly full of breakfast food. Tuck in! The announcement about the competition sent all of the students into a frenzy. Quidditch had been a great escape, but now they had something new and different to look forward to. The Ravenclaws were particularly excited as they were behind in points, thanks to their loss in the Quidditch match against Hufflepuff, and this contest might be the perfect way for them to catch up. Slytherin seemed very keen to win too, as the loss of Draco Malfoy as Seeker had hit their Quidditch team rather hard. By the time everyone had gotten on the Hogwarts Express, all anyone was talking about was what cookie recipes they planned to use for the contest auditions. Do you reckon old-fashioned chocolate chip will do? No, of course not. This is Gordon Ramsay we're baking for. You need some finesse. I'll just use one of Grandmother's old recipes. She was the heir to the Quell Magique bakery back before it closed. Ooh, I so want to make it in. I won a blue ribbon for my coconut cream pie back in 2nd grade. This was meant for me. Can you put mango in a biscuit? Ah, that sounds disgusting. How much you want to bet half those girls thinking about entering are just doing it because they have a crush on Professor Ramsay? Snorted Ron. I'd say half the people in general, Harry said amusedly. Dean said Seamus just about screamed when he heard the announcement. Apparently he and his mother, Mrs. Finnegan, have been sending fan letters to Ramsay for years. Hermione frowned disapprovingly at them both. You two are impassable. She opened the door to an empty compartment, and the 3 settled into it. Harry hoisted his trunk into the luggage rack on the right, and Hermione put her suitcase up top on the left before getting Crookshanks out of his carrier. The ginger cat curled up on the window seat beside her with a pleased murr. Still, just think of it, Ron said eagerly after he'd shut the compartment door behind them. 5,000 galleons, and a free meal for your entire family at one of the best magical restaurants in the world. That's unbelievable. It is pretty cool, agreed Harry. I wouldn't have thought everyone would get so into it. Well, why not? Asked Ron. I mean, it's only a contest hosted by the most famous wizard chef in the country. Harry shrugged. I don't know. I guess since no one really makes their own food around here, I never really thought about if anyone here liked to cook for fun. I mean, I can cook bangers and eggs, but that's only because Aunt Petunia made me do it. I never really liked doing it. Ah, well, you're kind of an outlier, Harry, Ron said bracingly. There are plenty of wizards and witches who like cooking. I mean, Mum adores it. I reckon she'd be a bloody good restaurant chef herself if she weren't so busy looking after all of us. Your mum's cooking is the best, Harry agreed. Too bad she can't enter the contest. Hermione had her finger resting on her lip thoughtfully, her eyes resting absently on Ron. Ron, why don't you go for it? She said abruptly. Ha, said Ron. Why don't you enter the contest? Hermione asked, sounding a little more eager. Your mum can't do it, but I know you've learned some cooking from her. Harry's face lit up. Hey, yeah, do you think your mum would teach you some recipes? Well, sure, I guess she would if I asked her, Ron mumbled sheepishly. I mean, she's always had us in the kitchen whenever she could, helping her peel potatoes and dice carrots and stuff. Ginny was too stubborn to sit still, and help, and Fred and George would always try to spike the shepherd's pie with sneezing powder. So I ended up picking up the load a lot of the time, me and Percy. I mean, the thought of his estranged brother made Ron's face contort unpleasantly. Both Harry and Hermione silently agreed in unison to get the conversation off of Percy quickly. Then why not try, Ron? Harry asked. I'm sure Ramsay would be impressed if you did, and you did say your mum's been trying to get a reservation at Hell's Kitchen for ages. Ron's eyes lit up. Yeah, he said at last. Yeah, why not? I'll ask Mum. I wonder if I can get her to show me how to make her rosemary butter biscuits. Those always impress Dad's co-workers around Christmas time. They talked over the various recipes Ron knew for the rest of the train ride. Hermione personally thought that coconut shortbread sounded best, while Harry was leaning more toward treacle sandwich biscuits. Harry felt a little bit bad that he'd never asked Ron about cooking before. The excited, but thoroughly expert way he talked about it reminded Harry a bit of how Ramsay would talk about potions. It's all sort of a balancing act, see? Ron explained. Like, take something sweet like caramel, put too much of it in, and it sort of overwhelms the taste buds. If you counteract all that sweet and salt with something savory like bacon or something fruity like pears, you kind of wake everything up. The flavor's not one note, so it doesn't get boring, it kind of transforms in your mouth. When Ron disembarked from the Hogwarts Express with Harry and Hermione several hours later, he had a new bounce in his step as he dashed over to Mr. and Mrs. Weasley on the platform. Mum, he shouted jubilantly. Mum, there's something I need to tell you. Chapter 7. Chocolate Cream Pie. Chapter text. Mrs. Weasley was thrilled at the news of Ramsay's competition. She insisted Ron help her with all of the meals over Christmas break so that he could practice. Over the next 2 weeks, Ron learned how to cook an egg 11 different ways, quickly dice vegetables, and bake the perfect shepherd's pie. Harry had already loved Mrs. Weasley's cooking, but Ron helping in the kitchen too only seemed to make it ever better, not just because of Ron's own flair with spices, but because of how happy Mrs. Weasley clearly was to share her cooking knowledge with her youngest son. On Christmas Eve, she gave Ron the reins with dessert. She left him her best chocolate cream pie recipe and then started work on the rest of dinner, while Ron started on the pie, carefully adding some of his favorite spices into the batter. When dinner was over, Ron brought out a perfectly gorgeous-looking pie to a round of applause from the entire table. Wow, said Ginny. Oh, Ron, it looks delicious, beamed Hermione. Ron's ears went a bright pink, and he smiled shyly as he put down the pie and sat down. Looks like our baby brother can bake after all, said George, grinning. Who would have thunk it? I knew it all the time, Fred said sarcastically. It looks like something from a real bakery, Lupin said with a smile. I'm impressed. Don't be impressed yet, Mrs. Weasley said sharply, though she was smiling. Taste always outranks appearances. Let's have a go at it. No, Harry, I'll go first, please. She cut into her slice, removing a small piece and placing it gently in her mouth. Her eyes widened. Then, to everyone's surprise, they abruptly filled with tears and her hand flew to her mouth as she let out a quiet squeak. Mum, Ron asked anxiously. Oh no, did I put in too much chili powder? I'm so sorry, I thought it'd balance the chocolate, Mrs. Weasley choked. No, it's just a little hotter than I expected. Her face was turning red as she took out her wand, materialized some water in a nearby glass, and chugged it down. Once she'd gathered herself, she exhaled loudly. Phew, That does have a kick, she laughed. Seeing the look on Ron's face, Mrs. Weasley quickly bustled over to him. "Oh, Ronald, don't you fret," she said soothingly, patting his head gently. "It was a lovely idea. You just need to make sure you taste test the batter beforehand. All chefs do that if they're adding onto a recipe to make sure that the balance of ingredients is right. And in the meantime," with a wave of her wand, she made everyone's glasses fill to the brim with cold milk and then added a thick layer of fluffy whipped cream onto Ron's pie. That should help, Harry had to admit. Ron's pie definitely left a spicy aftertaste, but for what it was worth, he thought it was actually pretty good. The whole thing sort of dreamily melted in your mouth. Mrs. Weasley wasn't the only one excited about Ron competing. Bill's fiancée, Fleur, tried to give Ron some of her own cooking tips. Unfortunately, her attention was more of a hindrance than a help, since Ron was too distracted by her Vila glamour to take in much of what she said. "You Britons tend to roast food, and it dries out terribly," Fleur explained, as she roasted a pan of chicken over the fire while Ron watched. "Now when you flambe meat with just a hint of wine, it locks in all that flavor and aroma." "Yeah," Ron said, clearly too dazed to take in everything she was saying. "Cool." Hermione frowned deeply as Harry and Ginny watched the two of them from the living room. HMPH. I wonder what Professor Ramsay would say about her attitude toward British food, she muttered grumpily as she crossed her arms tightly over her chest. "Probably that she's a hoity-toity twit with her head up her arse, and her taste buds stuck back in the Middle Ages," Ginny said with a smirk. Harry laughed. Christmas was rather fun overall, excluding the awkward visit from the new Minister of Magic, Rufus Scrimgeour. He'd asked to see Harry privately, but the meeting between the two didn't last long, ending in raised voices and Scrimgeour stomping away from the burrow in a huff. When Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Ginny all got ready to board the Hogwarts Express again, Mrs. Weasley pulled Ron aside and gave him a big, squeezing hug. "All right, Ron," she said in a businesslike tone. "Keep me posted, and if you need any help, send an owl to me any time, all right." "Okay, Mum," Ron said with a nod. Mrs. Weasley patted his cheek proudly. "That's my boy." "Good luck at the audition," said Mr. Weasley brightly. "We'll keep our fingers crossed." The train whistle blew, and everyone had to shuffle on board as it prepared to leave the station. Ron waved to his parents on the platform until they were out of sight. Then he, Hermione, Ginny, and Harry started up off the corridor. "We better go meet with the other prefects, Ron," Hermione reminded him. "Oh," said Ron, faintly put out. He always felt a little uncomfortable whenever he had to go to prefect meetings. Even though Draco Malfoy hadn't shown up to the last one, they still were always a little stilted. Plus, he always hated leaving Harry alone. Ron and Hermione bid Ginny and Harry goodbye and headed up toward the compartment that always held the prefect meetings. When they arrived, they found a few familiar faces amongst the prefects assembled, the two sixth-year Hufflepuff prefects, Hannah Abbott and Ernie Macmillan, and the two sixth-year Ravenclaw prefects Anthony Goldstein and Padma Patil. Noticeably absent once again were the two sixth-year Slytherin prefects. "So Malfoy and Pansy are no-shows again, huh?" Ron muttered to Hermione under his breath with a bit of a grin. "Man, are you sure today isn't Christmas?" Hermione stifled her laugh behind her hand, trying to stay serious. "It is kind of weird," she murmured back. "I suppose Pansy just doesn't have any interest in prefect duties unless she can do them with Malfoy. And if Malfoy's not here, well, no point in her being here either, right?" "It's probably just as well," Ernie Macmillan forcefully interjected himself into their conversation. "They never really upheld the responsibilities of a prefect." He smiled and shook each of their hands pompously in turn. "Good to see you, Ron, Hermione." "Hi, Ernie," Ron greeted offhandedly. "Did you know Hannah's going out for the Magic contest?" Ernie asked, grinning proudly over his shoulder at her. "Ernie," said Hannah, smiling uncomfortably. "You don't have to brag about it. I think she'll make it to the top 2 easily." Ernie continued over Hannah's objections, despite her modesty. "Ron's auditioning too," said Hermione quickly. Hannah's face brightened. "You cook too, Ron?" "Well," Ron started uncomfortably. "I learned from Mum. Yes, she's always had us in the kitchen. He's perfectly brilliant." Hermione cut him off forcefully. "Well, we'll see," Ernie said with a wry smile. "I have to wonder if Ron could make Yorkshire pudding quite as well as Hannah. No offense, of course, Ron." "None taken." Ron said awkwardly. Well, Ron's chocolate cream pie is the best I've ever tasted, Hermione replied coolly. There was something of a strange edge to her voice. It almost reminded Ron of when Ginny would argue with him about their favorite Quidditch teams. Just try Hannah's lemon meringue, said Ernie, clearly trying to keep toe-to-toe with Hermione, even though his tone feigned much more pleasantry. It'll put Ramsay himself to shame. Just you wait. Hannah looked just as uncomfortable as Ron felt during this whole exchange. Hermione opened her mouth to argue further, but Ron stepped in. All right, time out, he said with an awkward chuckle. Let's have a nice meeting and leave the competition to Ramsay, eh? Hannah nodded in overly passionate agreement. Yes, please. Ron was very glad to finish up with all the formalities and leave the prefect's compartment to go find Harry. As he and Hermione walked down the hall, he glanced at her out the corner of his eye. Hermione, he said lowly, his ears going pink. Thanks for sticking up for my cooking even though my pie wasn't that great. Hermione looked at him in surprise. Then she looked away quickly, her cheeks flushing. Oh, why, you're welcome. She then looked back up at him, her pink face faintly upset. But really, your pie was lovely. Sure, it was a little spicy before your mum added the cream and milk, but, well, you're still learning, right? Sounds like Hannah's a bit ahead of me, Ron mumbled gloomily. Getting a meringue right is pretty hard. The consistency has to be both fluffy and yet stiff enough that it doesn't fall apart when you cut into the pie. That takes a lot of talent. You'll do brilliantly, Ron, Hermione said sharply. I know it. Ron looked up at her, his blush creeping down from his ears to the rest of his face. Hermione looked very pink too, and she looked like she was fighting with herself not to break eye contact. Ron's mouth slowly curled up into a small smile, and he lightly leaned his shoulder against hers as they walked together. Thanks, Hermione. Chapter 8. The Audition. Chapter text. The day of the audition, Ron barely ate anything at breakfast. It was the best indicator to Harry of just how nervous he was, and he and Hermione tried their best to reassure him. You know the biscuit recipe, said Hermione sympathetically, and you know how to bake them. That's all you have to do in the audition, at least, right? Right, said Harry. You've got this, Ron. Ron smiled weakly, clearly not that comforted but appreciating the gesture all the same. When he went down to the dungeons that morning, he found a long line of students already standing outside Ramsay's office. Ron inwardly grumbled to himself that he wished he'd brought one of his Martin Miggs comic books to keep him preoccupied, as it took hours for him to get through the line, and the waiting only served to make him more nervous. Upon getting closer to the front, he noticed that students were entering in groups of 12, a ways ahead of him. He noticed Hannah Abbott going in, as well as Padma Patil and the new Slytherin seeker Roy Harper. Ron glanced around at the people in front of and behind him. He didn't recognize any of them. Most of them looked to be in Slytherin or Hufflepuff, and they were all younger than him. He caught the eye of one of the Slytherin girls, and to his surprise, she actually offered him a small smile. Nervous? She asked him. Ron was so startled that he gave a self-conscious laugh. Heh, yeah, a little bit. The girl nodded. It's my first time competing in something like this too, she said levelly. I've baked at home before, but never in a competition. Me either, said Ron, pleasantly surprised by her sympathy. I've barely even baked at home. Mum's always had us in the kitchen, but, well, I've never really actively cooked on my own since this last Christmas. Saying it out loud made Ron feel even worse. He really was a long shot to get much of anywhere in this whole thing. Part of him started to wonder if he shouldn't just leave the line now and head back upstairs. The girl crossed her arms, her black eyes soft despite the discerning look on her face. Even if she was younger than him, Ron got this feeling she was unusually sharp for her age. Even her curly hair and complexion reminded him a bit of Hermione, though she had her hair done in intricate cornrows that pushed all of the braided hair to flow down her right shoulder. You're Ron Weasley, aren't you? She asked, though judging by the tone of her voice, she seemed to already know the answer to her question. Yeah, Ron replied awkwardly. She smirked. Well, considering that everyone underestimated you before your last Quidditch match, I most certainly am not going to underestimate you today. She extended a dark hand to him, offering him an almost daring expression. May the best novice win, she said decisively, her black eyes and white smile blazing. Ron was startled by the gesture. Then, his face breaking out into a small smile, he took her hand and shook it. All right, yeah. It was their turn. Ron headed on in with 10 others and the slithering girl into Ramsay's classroom. It felt like all of them were holding their breath as they stepped over the threshold. The room had once again been completely transformed. All of the desks were gone and were replaced with 12 cooking stations, complete with a small oven, a set of burners, a short countertop, and a roll-away butcher's block complete with drawers full of cooking utensils. Ramsay stood at the front of the room, dressed in his usual white robes, and his arms lightly crossed over his chest. "Hello, everyone," he greeted them. "Pick a station, and we'll get started." Everyone rushed into place. Most of Ron's competition bustled up toward the front, but he decided after a moment to just pick the station closest to him. The slithering girl with the braids patiently let everyone else run to the front, and so ended up in the station just to the top right of Ron. "Welcome to the auditions for Magic F Jr.," said Ramsay. Ron didn't want to even contemplate how many times Ramsay had likely made this speech that day, and how many more times he'd have to repeat it. But fortunately, the potions professor acted as though he was saying it for the first time. "You will have exactly 30 minutes to bake me a batch of your best holiday biscuits. You each have a kitchenette, of course, but you'll also have an assistant during this first challenge." Room suddenly erupted in cracking noises. Several students flinched and cried out in surprise, but Ron wasn't one of them, for he recognized the sound. A whole assortment of house elves had appeared in the room, each of them appearing on the countertop of one of the students' workstations. Ron looked up at the elf at his station, and his eyes widened. "Darby, Master Weasley, sir," greeted Darby brightly. He grabbed onto Ron's hand, shaking it heartily with both of his. "So good to see you again." "Good to see you too, Darby," said Ron. He noted the ugly red woolen cap on Darby's head that the elf had trimmed holes out of so that his bat-like ears could poke out of the top, and grinned, knowing full well that Hermione had made that hat, and a couple dozen like it, a few years earlier in an attempt to forcibly free all the Hogwarts house elves. Everyone turned to look at Darby and Ron as they shook hands. Ramsay smiled. "These house elves work down in the Hogwarts kitchens," he said. "They will be here to fetch any and all ingredients and tools you need to bake your cookies from their pantry. They have been instructed, however, to not help you with the baking itself. They will only fetch things for you. Your time starts now." The classroom immediately erupted in hustle and bustle. The other competitors all started grabbing baking tools and shouting at their house elf partners to get what they needed. Ron took an extra couple of seconds to gather his thoughts. Then he turned to Darby. "All right, I'm Darby. Can you get me butter, rosemary, sugar, a lemon, 2 eggs, flour, baking soda, oh, and salt, please?" "Right away, Master Weasley," Darby said brightly. He disappeared with a crack. A moment later, he'd popped back with the rosemary and butter, then the lemon and eggs. Ron got right to work peeling the lemon, and then grating the peel as Darby returned with the flour, sugar, and baking soda. The next 15 minutes were some of the most fast-paced and grueling Ron had ever known in his life. He couldn't even pay attention to anything else going on in the kitchen because of the grind that the limited timetable had put him under. He just had to keep focused on one lone fact. His biscuits needed to bake in the oven for 12-15 minutes. Therefore, he had to have his unfinished biscuits on the baking sheet and looking perfect in 18 minutes or less. 15 minutes left, called Ramsay's voice over the din. All of the students gave panicked outbursts. Ron hurriedly rolled his dough into little balls and soaked each of them in a sugar and butter mix before placing them nimbly on the baking sheet. He glanced up at the slithering girl in front of him. She picked up a sheet full of her biscuits, which were cut into little donut-like shapes, and put them in the oven. It was then that Ron realized he'd forgotten something. "Darby," he said urgently. "I need a biscuit cutter. Can you get me one? It doesn't matter what kind." "Right away, sir," said Darby. He disappeared with another crack, and Ron hurriedly worked on rolling the rest of his biscuits. The minutes on the clock seemed to drag painfully while Ron waited for Darby. Even though only 2 minutes had gone by, it had felt like forever before the house elf returned. Unfortunately, he returned empty-handed. "There were no biscuit cutters left, Master Weasley," Darby said despondently. "The only ones in the cupboard are being used." The elf pointed to the front of the classroom at 5 of Ron's competitors using star and round biscuit cutters. Ron's eyes darted up to the clock. He only had 13 minutes. If he didn't get the biscuits in the oven right now, there'd be no chance that they'd be done in time. He racked his brain, trying to think of something. No biscuit cutters. Could I decorate them with frosting? No, the piping alone would take too much time. Are there any biscuit molds in the kitchen, Darby? He asked. I don't believe so, sir, Darby said sadly. Damn, Ron thought in frustration. His eyes shot from the clock to Darby and back. What else might the house elves have in the pantry that he could use to decorate the biscuits? They did a lot of cooking. They made everything at mealtimes, from the turkeys to the hot chocolate. The hot chocolate. Ron's eyes lit up. Darby, I need one of the mugs that you all used to put our hot chocolate in, you know, the real old ones. Darby didn't seem to understand, but he nodded. Yes, sir. He disappeared with another crack. About 15 seconds later, he was back, holding an old-fashioned mug emblazoned with the Hogwarts crest in one hand. Thanks, Darby, said Ron, beaming. He took the mug and very gently pressed the bottom of it down on top of his bowls of dough to flatten them, before flipping the mug over and lightly pressing the Hogwarts coat of arms into the top of the compressed biscuits. It left a softly marbled impression with the shape of a tiny shield in the center of the dough. Ron quickly snatched up his baking sheet and put it in the oven, turning the oven up as hot as he dared. The next 11 minutes were the longest in Ron's life. He watched the cookies tensely through the oven window, pacing back and forth. He glanced at his competitors. Some of the students in the front were decorating their plates with frosting and garnish. Thinking he needed something to pass the time and distract himself from the tension, Ron took some of the leftover rosemary and chopped it up into sweet little clusters so as to decorate his plate with them. When the rosemary butter biscuits came out of the oven, they were a light yellowish tan, with the faintest hint of brown around the impressions Ron had made with the mug. They actually looked pretty good. 30 seconds, called Ramsay. Ron hurriedly put on his oven mitt, retrieved the biscuits from the oven, and very carefully scooped them off with a spatula onto his plate. 10, 9, 8. Ron arranged the biscuits in a disheveled stack. 6, 5, 4. Ron tossed his sprigs of rosemary onto the plate on either side of the biscuits. 2, 1, time's up, said Ramsay. Hands off your biscuits. All the students stepped back from their stations. Ron exhaled heavily. His head was pounding and his heart was racing. He looked around at the other competitors and was unsurprised to see similarly overwhelmed faces. One Hufflepuff boy already had tears streaming down his face, while one of the Slytherin girls was holding onto the countertop with a vice grip as if she was trying not to faint. Each of the competitors, in turn, came up to the front of the classroom to present their biscuits. Most of the students' work clearly didn't impress Ramsay, being too dry or underdone, but he was cordial. An exception was the Slytherin girl with the braids, who Ramsay identified as Bridget. She presented a plate of coffee and brown sugar biscuits shaped like donuts, which Ramsay found very inventive and delicious. She'll make it in the top 12 easy, Ron thought to himself. When it was his turn to present his biscuits, Ron tried to walk straight and tall, even despite his knocking knees. Hello, Ron, Ramsay greeted him pleasantly. Ron smiled weakly. Hi, Professor. What have you made for me today? Rosemary butter biscuits. They're my mum's recipe. She bakes them every year for my dad's friends at the office. Ramsay picked up one of Ron's biscuits, examining it critically. Your presentation of the biscuits is lacking, he said slowly. It's little more than a stack, but the pattern on top, what did you use for this? A Hogwarts mug, sir, Ron answered sheepishly. Ramsay blinked, then his expression morphed into a small smile. Very interesting, he said. Why did you use that? There were no more biscuit cutters, Ron answered, and there were no molds in the kitchen, and I only had a minute left before my biscuits had to be in the oven for them to finish on time, so you improvised, finished Ramsay, his smile widening. Very good, Ron. Ron's heart fluttered in a giddy mixture of relief and excitement. Thanks, he breathed. Ramsay's expression turned more serious as he slowly broke the biscuit in his hand in half. Looks a touch underdone, he said lowly. See how it crumbles like that? I think a minute more would probably done this some good. Ron bit his lip as Ramsay took a bite. He chewed and swallowed, his eyes resting on Ron thoughtfully. Your rosemary and butter flavors are both excellent, he said levelly. They balance each other very nicely. I can see why your mother gets compliments for these. Ron grinned broadly. However, Ramsay continued, his tone not shifting, the flavors themselves are very muted. They work all right for a holiday potluck, but they're a touch underwhelming for a student baking competition. Do you think you can step up if you make it into the top 12? Yes, sir, Ron said at once, even despite his heart pounding against his ribs. I mean, I'd sure like to try. Ramsay considered Ron carefully. Ron tried very hard to guess what he was thinking, but his expression was a perfectly unreadable mask. Then Ramsay inclined his head in a nod. You should be very proud of yourself, Ron, he said kindly. Well done on your biscuits. Thank you, sir. As Ron stepped back, he wasn't sure how to feel. Had he convinced Ramsay? Had he not? Had he made it? Had he not? Even as he went back up to the Gryffindor common room, told Hermione and Harry about his audition, and went to bed that night, those questions still rattled in his head. Had he convinced Ramsay? Had he not? Had he made it? Had he not? Ron didn't sleep a wink. When Harry got up the next morning, Ron immediately pressured his best friend to go downstairs with him to go check the notice board. When they reached the bottom of the stairs, they found a common room filled with cheering and screaming people. Hey, it's Ron, said Seamus Finnegan. Everyone cheered, abruptly descending on Ron in a mob to pat his back and chant his name. Weasley, Weasley, Weasley. Wah, ha, Ron said, hardly daring to believe it. Hermione shoved herself through the crowd and threw both of her arms around Ron, squeezing him tightly. You did it, Ron, she squealed excitedly as she pulled away. You were only one of 2 Gryffindors who made it into the top 12. Ron glanced at Harry, who was grinning from ear to ear. Congratulations, Ron, he said brightly. Ron was stunned. He couldn't believe it. Was this just an amazing dream, or, with some difficulty, he forced himself to the front of the crowd to look at the notice board. The list of names was divided by house, with their years marked next to them, and there it was, in black and white. Hufflepuff Rose Zeller, 2 ND year, Owen Caldwell, 3 RD year, Kevin Whitby, 4 TH year, Hannah Abbott, 6 TH year, Ravenclaw Arjuna Balaji, 4 TH year, Astoria Greengrass, 4 TH year, Cho Chang, 7 TH year, Slytherin Bridget Jahim, 4 TH year, Millicent Bulstrode, 6 TH year, Daphne Greengrass, 6 TH year, Gryffindor Colin Creevy, 5 TH year, Ron Weasley, 6 TH year. Chapter 9, Hannah. Chapter text, Hannah hadn't slept a wink the night before the Magic F audition results came out either. She'd been too excited to get started in the competition to even think about sleeping. The audition had gone pretty well. Hannah had made Ramsay her favorite mocha chocolate chip biscuits, baked into the shape of tiny cups and served with ice-cold milk. Rams had been very pleased with her creativity and her flavors, so Hannah was modestly sure that she had a good chance of making it. The night after the audition, Hannah sat up in bed, her wand lit up in her lap as she skimmed through a copy of Enchantment in Baking, making notes in the margins. She was just editing the herbs she would want to add to a good steak and kidney pie when she heard a rustle of the curtains. Hannah! Hannah looked up. Susan Bones, rubbing the side of her face tiredly, was peeking through her bed curtains. Oh, sorry, whispered Hannah. Did I wake you up? Susan yawned. No, just needed the loo. What are you still doing up? Couldn't sleep, Hannah said with a shrug. Susan sat down on the floor, letting Hannah's bed curtains drape around her as she leaned her head and arms on Hannah's bed. We've got class in the morning, you know, Susan reminded her. Oh, I know, Hannah answered with a small smile. I can't help it, I'm excited. Susan smiled sleepily as Hannah continued. I mean, you know how long I've been saving up and brushing up on Muggle technology and stuff, so I can go to culinary school. If I had Gordon Ramsay's seal of approval on my cooking too, it'd probably be that much easier to open some fancy restaurant somewhere, Susan agreed tiredly. Right, said Hannah brightly. Susan adjusted her arms on the bed, her face getting a little more serious. I'm sure you'll get in. You're more than good enough. But the competition's sure to be difficult. Ramsay's got pretty high standards. Hannah looked back down at the page of the cookbook thoughtfully. Yeah, she looked up with a small smile. Well, I'm willing to work hard to impress him. That's all I can really do, right? Susan smiled tiredly. Ma'am, she yawned again. Well, I'm going back to bed. Try to get a little sleep, okay? Hannah nodded, and Susan returned to her bed. Despite her assent, however, Hannah did not get any sleep. Her mind was racing too fast, imagining the amazing restaurant she'd open in Diagon Alley after graduation. It'd be bright, and open, and friendly, and warm. Hannah had always loved the idea of long tables, like the sort in a German beer garden, ones that allowed all of the guests to sit together in one space, rather than cloistering themselves away in separate, darkened corners. There would be lots of natural light and several large brick fireplaces, and there would be a large mural along the back wall of the restaurant, covered in dragons, hippogriffs, unicorns, and winged horses. Each table would be made of warm oak, and each chandelier would be made of crystal. The food would be fresh, hot British comfort food, toad in the hole, Yorkshire pudding, fish and chips, mince pies and roast potatoes, and around Christmas time, the restaurant would host grand parties featuring live musicians and lots of dancing. With how the war was going, the thought of making a place like that sounded so good. Hannah put down her quill for a second. Her eyes drifted up to the hangings over her head. 13 muggles killed last summer, Stan Schirmpike, arrested as a Death Eater, Katie cursed in Hogsmeade. There was so much fear and confusion and grief to be found everywhere. Hannah had gone down to bake in the kitchens a lot this school year. Keeping her hands busy baking something sweet for her friends always helped her keep her mind busy too, so she didn't have to think about the war. So Hannah returned her mind to the make-believe restaurant in her mind's eye. It would be such a wonderful place. It'd be a lighthouse in this dark time, a sanctuary, where everyone would feel welcome, safe, and at home. When the sun came up, Hannah decided to wait in the common room until the notice was put up. As the common room filled, she passed the time skimming through the recipes she'd annotated, wondering what kinds of food Ramsay would ask them to make for the competition. I hope there's a round where we can make pies, Hannah thought brightly. Blackberry was the one she liked baking the most. It was her mother's favorite, and she loved baking it on her birthday in place of a cake. When Professor Sprout finally arrived early that morning, paper in hand, it took Hannah all of her self-control not to sneak a peek. When it was up, Hannah found her name near the very top. She couldn't stop herself from cheering out loud. Yeah, Sprout hushed her quickly, pointing down at the floor to indicate her housemates sleeping downstairs. Hannah covered her mouth with both hands, trying to contain her excitement, and Sprout gave her a softer, prouder expression. Congratulations, Hufflepuff's head of house whispered. Hannah grinned from ear to ear. Thanks, she squeaked back. She twirled around the room giddily before packing up her things and heading out of the common room. She had to go bake something in the kitchen to celebrate, maybe a creme brulee. Chapter 10. Daphne. Chapter text. Daphne Greengrass slept poorly after the audition. Ramsay's response to her almond spritz biscuits had been lukewarm to her mind, and to her frustration, Daphne had had trouble getting a good fix on what Ramsay was thinking. To make matters worse, she knew Astoria was also competing, and as much as Daphne knew she'd hate losing, she knew she'd hate it even more if she lost to her younger sister. Daphne woke up the next morning and took her sweet time heading downstairs, picking out her prettiest gold earrings and slowly pinning up her hair. She really didn't want to let on how badly she wanted to make it in, so she figured if she walked downstairs casually, she'd be able to obscure any disappointment she might feel if she wasn't on the list, and hear congratulations from everyone else beforehand if she was. She put on her dark red lipstick, puckering her lips once to make sure it looked right, before applying her eyeshadow and long false lashes. Daphne was sharp enough to know that in many ways she was quite superficial. She valued how people presented themselves and looked down on those who did so poorly. But at the same time, she knew that appearances were important, although they could sometimes be deceiving. If you were sharp enough, they could tell you a lot. The people that dressed poorly often had low self-esteem or just didn't care enough to make a good impression. They didn't care about advancement. They were complacent, lazy, and often ignorant about the world around them. They deluded themselves into thinking that they could just plug out and not play the game and still get everything they wanted anyway. In other words, they were people Daphne wanted nothing to do with. The people who dressed to impress like she did understood that people invariably do judge each other, and that if you want to get anywhere, sometimes you just have to work with what you have and project an image that both you and the world will like. That balancing act was hard sometimes, but she was resilient enough. She could handle it. She could handle herself. Damn, Daphne hissed under her breath. She'd accidentally dropped the lash she'd been applying. She picked it up and applied it perfectly the second time. Looking herself over, she decided she looked presentable and left the bathroom. Outside waiting for her was her doormate Pansy Parkinson, who was fixing her hair. "Ah, the curl's already come out," she griped. "Use foxgloves next time," Daphne advised. "Sleekeasy is a perfect joke when it comes to hair." Pansy turned around so her hair faced Daphne. "Put it up for me." Daphne indulged her, quickly tying up Pansy's short black barb in a short updo. Pansy never put in the proper work with her hair because she knew Daphne was good at it and could pick up her slack. Daphne would have probably told Pansy to do it herself were it not for her needing to stay on the Parkinson family's good side. And she needed to be on their good side. Once she was done, Pansy looked her hair over in the bathroom mirror. Satisfied, she bustled downstairs. Daphne descended slowly behind her. When she arrived in the common room, Daphne found Pansy milling around the room like a bulldog sniffing around for something. Looking for Draco, Daphne thought to herself with a covert roll of her eyes. She could understand the sway of a romantic girl's emotions, but for the life of her, she would never understand Pansy. Draco was clearly just not interested anymore, but Pansy still clung on like a crazed grindalo. At that moment, Daphne's other doormate, Tracy Davis, came up to greet her. "Congratulations, Daphne," she said with a triumphant grin. Daphne, despite herself, was taken aback. "What? You made it into the top 12, said Tracy. "You and Millicent. And Bridget, the fourth-year muggle-born." Daphne was stunned she made it. Really, she went over to the board and skimmed through the names until she found hers. She stared at it for a long while before she became aware of the fact that she was grinning from ear to ear. Struggling to regain her composure, since she knew her teeth were not that pretty, she put forward her best closed-mouth smirk as she faced the rest of the common room. She noticed Millicent migrating across the room and inclined her head to her politely. "Congratulations, Millicent." Millicent looked back with a thoroughly uncaring eye. "Made it then, did I?" "Yes," said Daphne. Despite herself, she couldn't help but eye the larger girl curiously. "I'm surprised you went out for it." Millicent shrugged dismissively and headed over to look at the board herself. Daphne watched her go, before quickly strolling back the way she came. Several other students congratulated her as she headed back upstairs. When she reached the sixth-year Slytherin girls' dorm, Daphne closed the door and bent down to reach under her bed. She pulled out a worn brown leather book with a tiny silver lock on it. With a tap of her wand, she opened it. Inside were countless magical pictures, drawings, and handwritten paragraphs, all written like journal entries. It was a scrapbook. But there were two different types of writing in the book, and before Daphne's very eyes, an entry was being written, as if by an invisible hand. Jan 4, 1997, dearest Daphne, I got many compliments on your silver pocket watch today. Forgive me, but I had to lie and say that father had purchased it for my birthday, since Tulsa was in earshot. I look at it now and long to be looking into your blazing eyes. I beg of you, let me know of Ramsay's contest as soon as you know. I have our cottage in Bulgaria all picked out, and I have gotten old Uncle Parkinson's blessing. With his support, I hope to present my intent to marry you to my father this upcoming summer, after your birthday. That summer cannot come fast enough. Stay forever of spring, sweet laurel. Obericherem teye. Rudolph. Daphne beamed at the sight of the wonderful words, perfectly uncaring about how badly her gum line showed in her unattractively toothy grin. She bent down and kissed the page, leaving a soft impression of red lips behind, and then scribbled a quick response. Jan 4th, 1997, my Rudolph. I made it. Please tape in pictures of our house so that I may see it. I want to imagine the two of us standing outside of it every day of this competition. Oberi cherarem teye, to the moon and back I shall love you. Daphne.